Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. When you undermine a galactic democracy and turn it into your own personal empire, you're gonna make a lot of enemies. This is why Emperor Palpatine carried out several highly secretive plans during his time in power in order to keep his enemies at bay. Today we'll be taking a look at 7 of the most secretive Imperial projects. During the Clone Wars, Count Dooku sends a Confederacy of Independent Systems ambassador, who basically is a talking shark, to create more tension between the surface-dwelling Mon Cala and ocean-floor squatting Corans. This ultimately led to a devastating civil war which killed hundreds on both sides. During the Galactic Civil War, the Mon Cala would come to the aid of the Rebel Alliance and provide them with their only capital ships, the Mon Cala cruisers. During the Galactic Civil War, the Empire would copy Count Dooku. They would use operatives from the destabilization branch who were genetically modified to look like Mon Calamari to carry out false flag attacks against the Corans. This disruption would not only halt the creation of more Mon Calamari cruisers, it also created a rise in tension between the Corans and the Mon Calamari. Palpatine has always been obsessed with the idea of eternal life, as was his master Darth Plagueis and all those who preceded him. The only problem is that the Sith aren't exactly well positioned to find immortality. And that's because the dark side is fundamentally a destructive force, one that focuses on decay. Whereas the Jedi become one with the Force, the Sith achieve immortality or some semblance of it by beating the Force into submission. But thanks to the constant bickering and fighting between the Jedi and Sith throughout the years, many ancient Force techniques have been lost, including the secrets of Sith alchemy. In ancient times, roughly around 46-45 BBY, a Sith Lord named Darth Dreer created a virus that granted immortality to living beings. But little did the Sith realize the virus would infect individuals and then take over their minds and incorporate them into kind of a hive mind. On top of that, the infected individuals had a cannibalistic urge which also passed the infection to other living beings. Known originally as the sickness, the knowledge of this disease was eventually uncovered by Darth Vader, who then commissioned a scientific team from the Imperial Biological Weapons Division to re-engineer the virus and weaponize it. This research was done on an isolated Star Destroyer known ironically as the Vector. The scientists successfully recreated the disease, which was called Project I-71A, codenamed Blackwing. Unfortunately, the disease broke out of containment and took over the entire ship. When Mandalore was occupied by the Empire after the Clone Wars, an Imperial Academy was immediately built onto the planet. The Mandalorians were one of the most deadly warrior races in the galaxy, and so having loyal Mandalorians serve in the Imperial military would be a great boon. The Imperial Academy offered opportunities to the Mandalorians that they could not find elsewhere. One young Mandalorian cadet named Sabine Wren would design a weapon known as the Arc Pulse Generator, nicknamed the Duchess, while at one of these academies. This super weapon would emit an energy beam that could be coded to target specific materials. Once the weapon latched onto that material with its destructive energy, it basically disintegrated everything along with any person wearing that material. The Empire would use this weapon to target the nearly indestructible Beskar armor that Mandalorians commonly wore. The Empire attempted to keep this project a secret from the Mandalorians, obviously because of its controversial nature. Emperor Palpatine planned for everything, including his eventual death. Well, first death. Shortly after the devastating battle over Endor, creepy Sentinel robots began appearing in front of select Imperial officers. These robots were dressed in red and had Palpatine's face and voice. They had with them secret orders on what to do in the event of Palpatine's death. This was known as the Contingency Plan. You see, Emperor Palpatine was an extremely vindictive individual. He believed that if the Empire could no longer protect him, then the Empire no longer deserved to exist. So this contingency plan was probably one of the most petty strategies ever conceived by a dictator. The first part of this plan was to consolidate Imperial forces under the command of Gallius Rax, who was sort of Emperor Palpatine's only protege. The second part of the plan was for Gallius Rax to speed up the destruction of the Imperial military. The Battle of Jakku, for instance, was designed as a trap for both the Empire and the New Republic forces. Palpatine had one of his secret observatories built on the planet, and the idea was once troops were fully engaged on the planet, Gallius Rax would pour Sith artifacts and relics into the core of the planet, which would crack the planet in half in a massive explosion, or something like that. This part of the plan more or less worked, aside from the planet cracking. The Empire's military was quickly destroyed within less than a year. Gallius Rax would even feed Imperial troop movements to the New Republic in order to speed up their destruction. Another part of the contingency plan was something known as Operation Cinder. This was kind of Emperor Palpatine's scorched earth policy. Basically, as the Empire was giving up ground, Palpatine ordered the destruction of entire planets to prevent the New Republic from taking them over. The worst part of Operation Cinder was the fact that it even targeted highly loyal Imperial worlds like Vardos. This was the last straw for many Imperial soldiers and caused mass desertion. The last part of the contingency plan was a list of the Empire's most capable and loyal officers. These individuals were supposed to be spared from the destruction that all of their fellow Imperial servants would suffer. These chosen individuals would venture off into the unknown region and forge a new and stronger empire, which of course would turn into the First Order. The Death Star program was the mother of all secret projects, and it finds its beginnings during the Clone Wars as a blueprint created by the Geonosians. They dubbed it as the Ultimate Weapons Project. The idea of this type of superweapon has always been a big fetish for the Sith, so it's a pretty good fit for the Empire. During the Battle of Geonosis, Archduke Poggle the Lesser would give the blueprints for the battle station to Count Dooku for safekeeping. Count Dooku would show these plans to Palpatine shortly after the battle and get a green light to start construction on this massive project. It would be funded by the Trade Federation, the Munilist banking clans, and Techno Union, along with some covert funding redirected from the Republic as well. The Geonosians and their massive hives would be the perfect labor pool for such a project. Information about the Death Star would eventually leak to the Republic. Palpatine would gather around 150 industrials, senators, and other influential individuals to basically go over these very secretive plans. Every member who attended this meeting had to sign an NDA, and of course, no Jedi were involved. Construction of the Death Star battle station would begin immediately, starting off with the actual frame of the station and weapons emplacement. The main weapon, however, was still in the research phase and would be the last thing completed. The scientists working on it had no idea what they were doing until it was too late. Director Orson Krennic would name the weapons research program Project Celestial Power and convince crystallography expert Galen Erso that he was developing an unlimited fuel source that could bring billions of people out of poverty. Director Krennic also had to manage a massive logistical network that had to secretly somehow smuggle massive amounts of raw materials to the build site. This was overall one of the most secretive and impressive projects the Empire ever took on. The Clone Army was created for a very specific reason and for a very specific moment in time. Before the Clone Wars, the Republic hadn't had a standing army for 1,000 years. But in order to orchestrate the Clone Wars, the Sith needed to create two armies to create chaos and fear, which would erode the institutions of the democracy. The Confederacy of Independent Systems was pretty easy. They had many corporate and industrial interests, so they were able to create a droid army relatively quickly. The Republic, however, was a bit more difficult. There was no culture of military service amongst the populace, and such a move would be highly unpopular. So instead, a costly and highly specialized clone army was created. Now, once the Separatist threat was gone, the clone army was no longer economically feasible. In this new order, what the Galactic Empire needed was a large conscription army of lower quality troops who could keep the peace. This is where Vice Admiral Rampart's secret project, MANTLE, comes into play. The idea was to roll out a new infantry program utilizing regular Imperial citizens. Rampart would start off the program small with one unit known as the Elite Squad. With their initial success, the project made it to Phase 2, which was the creation of the TK Troopers, who were basically prototype stormtroopers. If you guys remember from the original trilogy, TK was usually used as a call sign before a unit's service number. These TK Troopers would be trained in secrecy on the planet of Daro by a group of 50 clone commandos. Very few clones in the JAR knew about this plan to eventually replace them. The Camino cloning program was the key to the rise of the Empire and fall of the Jedi. It would also be the key to Palpatine's future immortality. Shortly after the execution of Order 66, the Kaminoan cloning project was abruptly shut down, to everyone's surprise, including the Kaminoan Prime Minister Lama Su. Part of the reason was the Empire wanted to start phasing out the clone troopers and replacing them with conscript and volunteer citizens. But it was also because Palpatine wanted all of the Kaminoans' cloning technology and data. They even managed to get their hands on head Kaminoan scientist Nala Se. Palpatine's goal was to create a Force-sensitive clone body that he could one day inhabit should he actually die in a fiery explosion. We don't really know the full extent of what this cloning program was, but we do know that Baby Yoda might also have something to do with it. Also, Palpatine cloned a son for himself, but that clone ended up being non-force sensitive, to his disappointment. But that son would have a daughter, Rey, and well, that's what the sequel trilogies are all about.